You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. Now that I've lived it, it's not as simple as, hey, let's just reschedule everything because then we'll have lived. Hello there, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning into today's episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. I'm Felicia, and right now I'm recording this a few days ahead of normal. It's the night before Dave and I leave on our first ever road trip for fun, and I was thinking about this. This is the first vacation that Dave and I will have taken that's just for us, that has no element of seeing family or working or traveling with other people. We have actually never in the 4.5 years that we've been together just done something that's just for the two of us. And so this is a huge step and it feels really good. I did spend the day kind of being kind of cranky. It was a weird day for me. It was a day that didn't go how I had planned, for good and bad or whatever. But I have been feeling really in my head, and I think that's a manifestation of just feeling a little nervous, adventuring into the unknown, and all of that. So, anyway, if you want to, maybe I'll put together a blog of all of the pictures from our adventure next week sometime, or this week, I guess, as you're listening to this. But I'm sure I'll also be posting stuff on Instagram. So if you haven't had a chance to follow along on Instagram, see what I've been posting, I would love to have you along for this ride. What I wanted to talk about this week is, so this is the week of March 8th, so 8th through the 13th, and I know a lot of people kind of have their mark right in these 2 weeks of March where they feel like, okay, that was the day that my life changed. That was the day that my city shut down or such and such shut down. And I wanted to spend some time today talking about what has happened since a year ago and some reflections a little bit from within, where I was then, how this last year really has been. I mean, obviously you guys have been hearing me in the moment, sharing the thoughts, but thoughts are always different when you're looking at them in hindsight, right? So I wanted to share that last March, it was March 7th, was my last wedding pre-coronavirus. Obviously, there was talk about it getting worse and all of that. But March 7th was the last wedding I shot last year that didn't have guests with masks, that I didn't wear a mask. And actually, I happened to have been really sick then. So that whole first week of March, I had caught some kind of cold or ear infection. Like I was definitely congested. I don't think that I had COVID, and I went to the doctor the day before this wedding because I had been getting worse and worse that whole week. I had actually asked for a sub for my yoga class that Wednesday, stayed in bed, did everything I could to get better, was not feeling better, was starting to get like such bad pain and pressure in my ear. So finally got into the doctor that Friday before the wedding was on Saturday. And, so here's the thing, like life as a wedding photographer, and, maybe this will change. You guys, like, it's so interesting to think of this now, but like when you're a wedding photographer, you've built a connection with your couple. They're expecting you. And the last thing that you as a wedding vendor want to do is stress your couple out to the point of being like, hey, I have an ear infection, so I'm not gonna be able to shoot your wedding. Granted, I have a wonderful team. So thank God, like through COVID, if one of us was sick with COVID, there are people who can cover us and be there and be the backup so that our couples are not, out of luck. But at that time, I was thinking, I'm like, I have to be there for this couple. Like, if I'm not contagious, if I like I need to be able to be there. Like I've shot weddings in the past with fever and having thrown up beforehand, and you just kind of push through. And I'm not saying that's a good thing. It's kind of weird because I suppose there's an element of like, look how strong I was. Look how I like muscled through it. But there's also a little bit of an element of shame there, because working sick is not good. And the fact that we as Americans are so pressed and forced to work through being sick is probably a lot of bad behavior that did not help us with this pandemic. But when I went to the doctor, I got on some antibiotics. So I had been on antibiotics 24 hours before the wedding on the 7th. And I felt like crap. In fact, I remember feeling like I had earplugs in, but that is totally just the ear infection. And I thought I would be feeling better by that following day or the Monday, but I ended up just getting worse. Like I think I was in bed through the entire week of like that entire week, and even into the following week. Like I felt sick most of March, and I don't think it was COVID. I've never, like at that point, it was way too early to get a COVID test. Like they didn't have COVID tests available. And if they did, they were hard to come by. And, they had like the very intense testing facilities. And so when I talked to my doctor about it, in fact, I had a follow-up call with her the week after. And she was like, because I was worried. I was like, do you think I have COVID? Do I need to get tested? I'm not getting better. And she was like, you don't have any of the symptoms at that point. Like it's your ear and your sinus pressure. You don't have a fever. You don't have the shortness of breath. You're not having a cough. Like it doesn't sound like COVID. So if I did, I had no idea. I don't think it was. I think it was just happened to be a fluke. But I felt like that kind of kicked my, quarantine experience, the stay at home. I mean, gosh, what a whirlwind. Like when I really I'm so grateful that I'm taking this moment to really slow down and put myself back into the shoes that I was wearing then, because it was such a strange and scary time. I mean, I remember, so Dave, I can't remember if it was the week of the 16th or the week of the 9th. I'm pretty sure it was the week of the 9th. Like it was right around the time that I hadn't been feeling good. He kind of wasn't feeling good either. And so he ended up taking, I think, that whole week calling out sick from work, just because he didn't want to take the chance that if he did have something, knowing how sick I was, like exposing all his coworkers. So he stayed home. And then I believe it was by the following Monday, the March 16th, everything was shut down. Like, 14 days to stop the spread. Like his job shut down, was working from home, or in the process of figuring out how to work from home. And our lives changed forever, from that point, because we were amongst the people who were, immediately stopped seeing people. We did like a huge grocery shopping, with our 2 layers of masks on, and I was wiping down all of the groceries with the Clorox. I mean, it is crazy to think of now, especially with certain things. Like, I don't know about you guys, but I don't Clorox every single, package of spaghetti that I bring home anymore. But, just thinking about the little things like blowing out candles on a birthday cake, or not wearing masks into a store, or just, the amount of hand sanitizer we use. There's probably a million more examples that I'm just not thinking of right now, that we're just going to look at everything a little bit differently from here on out. And I don't usually get very political, but I can't help but share this part, that I just wonder what it's going to be looking back at this in 10 or 15 years, and think about, being an American, living in America during this, watching all of the states deal with it so differently. I mean, even right now, as I'm recording this, it was just right after, Texas reopened. I say that with like air quotes, and I have to laugh because where our numbers are right now is where they were at the, height of things in the summer. And we were scared then. Like, those numbers weren't great by any means. And with how bad they got this fall and during our normal, cold and flu season, how many lives were lost, how many people, heard that their family member was sick and heard about them going into the hospital and couldn't come and visit, couldn't come stay there with them, didn't know if that last time they saw them in person was the last time that they would ever see them. And I think about my own family, and I think of how grateful I am to still have all my family members. I feel so, so lucky to be able to say that, and so fortunate that it didn't go the other way. And I think that we have been, as a whole, very, very cavalier about the amount of loss that our country and our world has suffered through COVID. And I think it's going to be really interesting, the economic impact, and looking back on it way in the future, wondering and seeing the different paths that we could have taken, should have taken. And I just pray that we don't have to learn the lessons the hard way. And I hope that there is more compassion that has come out of this in the long run. I hope people learn that we do need help. We do need to be better of service to each other. We need to make healthcare so that everybody has equal access, that everybody can be taken care of. I personally deeply hope for all of those things and so much more. There's always an element of holding back a little bit when you're talking about politics, especially because I'm the kind of person that if I'm going to talk about it, I want to feel very, very sure of having a researched perspective. And that is not what I do when I sit down to have these discussions with you guys. So what I thought I would do is, as I kind of reflect back on this year, I thought I would go back through some of my Instagram posts at different points throughout the last year and just kind of look back on where my head was at then and how much things have changed. So one quick thing to keep in mind is I'm probably going to be bouncing back and forth between Felicia Marty photo video and A Bit From Within because I write both and share things on both. So this was my post from March 15th. And it's an engagement photo, and it says, "Absolutely loving this sneak peek from Jill and Zach's engagement session. Our lead Aaron did a wonderful job of capturing the beautiful happiness of this couple. They don't look stressed here, but I'm sure that with their wedding being just a couple weeks away, that they could use the good vibes, all the good vibes we can afford to send their way right now." Oh my gosh. It's like I said, I think this is kind of funny to look back on because at that point on March 15th, their wedding was scheduled for April 11th. And we thought that it definitely could happen at that point, 14 days to slow the spread. Everything will be okay. That did not end up happening. I think it was probably a few days, maybe a week after that they ended up having to cancel their wedding. They didn't cancel it. They ended up getting married down in Arizona where they were living at the time. And then we photographed their celebration with their family, not at a wedding venue, but in her sister's backyard later that summer. But the next post is 3 days later, so March 18th. And this is what I wrote. "It's so heartbreaking what's happening in our world right now. I woke up today, got dressed, even did my makeup, hoping it would help me stay positive and grateful right now. It's almost embarrassing to say I do feel grateful. Grateful for the sunshine, grateful Dave is able to work from home, grateful for a house with food and supplies, and even just grateful that I'm beginning to feel totally healthy again after a long couple week battle with a cold/ear infection. It seems like the world is falling apart, and I've got a handful of incredible couples who are facing rescheduling the weddings they've spent time and money planning for, not to mention happily and anxiously awaiting this special moment in their lives. No, it's not everything. If we have our health at the end of this and we've lost less people, that's what matters most. Not keeping up with lives only to have everyone you know suffer multiple losses of loved ones because we didn't care. A wedding can be rescheduled. A photo shoot with your healthy family all together can be rescheduled. A vacation can be rescheduled. But a connection with a loved one who's no longer here on earth, that can't be undone. I guess all I'm saying is that we must feel all the feelings, and we must know that this is for something bigger than all the things we're sad for, grieving to, and missing out on. Everything feels urgent, but it's up to us to decide what actually is. I hope we choose wisely. Ooh, that's strange because there's so much of that I still feel in this moment. I still feel copious amounts of gratitude for all that has gone well for us and our family. And I still feel that way about, there's things that can be rescheduled and we have to be willing to have those people, that are here with us. But I also can't help but reflect on the people that I've known in this past year who do have loved ones that have passed away. I have a close friend whose father just passed away, and he didn't die from COVID. He died from a heart attack. And the last year of his life was spent having space from my friend because of COVID. And I think there's going to be a lot of, I don't want to speak for her, but if I put myself in those shoes, I would feel a lot of anger of how do you wrap your mind around that? How do you have taken all of this space, put your life on hold, only to have suffered a loss anyway? I can think of many, many stories like that. It was just the one that I kind of used as an example. There are people who have lost people who couldn't be with those people because of COVID restrictions. And I think that's going to be a well of pain that as a collective we're going to have to deal with and face. The not being with our loved ones when something life-changing happened, even the good stuff like having a baby, not being able to just hop on a plane and fly out to see each other, be together. That's hard. It's not what I'm trying to say is now that I've lived it, it's not as simple as, hey, let's just reschedule everything because then we'll have lived. Because especially if you look at what happened, a lot of people didn't live. And if we would have done things differently then, maybe if we would have chosen more wisely, maybe things would have been different. But it's just not as, I guess, it's not as clear cut as I thought it was when I wrote that. I thought, let's make these decisions. It felt it did feel very urgent, but it felt a lot more short term. And I have no answers as to how to start living or when you choose not to reschedule, or if you end up, I appreciate all of my couples who did decide to modify their wedding somehow, whether they ended up getting legally married on top of a mountain by themselves with just one friend to capture the moment, or whether they had 10 friends gather social distance outside having a wedding and then reschedule their party for later. I admire the courage, and I also admire the courage of those who postpone their wedding to this summer, still having to face, restrictions like needing masks and less of a guest count, and their courage to face that still wondering, would it have been better if we just would have done this last year? But what can you do with that? There's going to be elements of regret. And regret is not something I think we should, pack in our baggage that we just carry with us for the rest of our life. I think regret is a teacher. I was actually listening to a podcast earlier with Brene Brown and Tim Ferriss and Dax Shepard, and they were talking about regret as a teacher. And I think that that's very, very important. But we all are going to, especially those of us who had big life things delayed or changed or put on hold or suffered a loss because of, there's going to be regret that is going to inform us for the rest of our lives. So as I kind of browse through some of these posts from the rest of March, I didn't post as much as I have been posting recently. I have, maybe 5 to 10 days between each of these posts. And every single one of them, I mentioned COVID in some way, not necessarily the word COVID, but like from March 29th, I said, here's a throwback to a magical moment, because who doesn't need a momentary glimpse at magic, at hope, at remembering the things that can be not just okay, but amazing. I know I have been not feeling any of that lately, but when I look back at these amazing weddings and families we've worked with, it makes me happy. Hoping everyone is staying safe as can be and hanging in there through the heartache. And I remember feeling at this time really annoyed by people who were not talking about it. And now I have a little bit more compassion for that, because I think the people who weren't talking about it, that was a survival strategy of their own. It took a lot of time, it probably took a greater part of the last year for me to really understand the people who wanted to deny what was happening. I think for me, I couldn't help but be like, this is happening. This is happening. We are suffering. The world is changing right now. I definitely was not one of those people that's like, oh, I just can't wait for things to go back to normal. This is frustrating. This is bullshit. I wasn't identifying with that then. I can see why now. And I've had long conversations, and I've felt with like my heart, I felt just the insurmountable amount of pain that life being put on hold did for them. And a lot of those people that I know are the people that have children. I don't have children, so I can't speak to how being a parent changes the way of navigating through the pandemic. Maybe I can get maybe I can rope one of my parent friends into coming on the podcast. But I think the people that I know that didn't have kids were a little bit more willing to go with the flow of the restrictions. And those who had children were in a much more difficult position. But I do just think it's interesting looking back. I remember telling Dave, I'm like, I was so annoyed by all the other wedding vendors who were just posting pictures of bouquets and being like, isn't this a great idea? Plan this for your wedding. And I'm like, how can we all not be talking about the fact that people are not allowed to do their weddings? Like at this point, through all of these posts, like through April into May, you could not have a wedding. You could not have a wedding. In fact, we had been scheduled for a mid-May wedding that the couple ended up going for a wedding in their parents' backyard. But they weren't going to do masks, and they weren't going to social distance, and they were just going to do it as normal. And we ended up saying no to that wedding. We just kind of parted ways with a contract. And it was a really, really tough decision for me as a business owner then, because I didn't know if that was the right decision. I just knew that if it was a super spreader event, that I didn't want my business associated with that. And as a business owner in the wedding business, it was very difficult to figure out those lines during the pandemic. The first wedding we ended up shooting after, this stay-at-home period was a elopement kind of. It ended up being just their one and only wedding because this sweet couple just ended up getting pregnant with their honeymoon baby, and they decided that they were good, that their wedding was what it needed to be, even though it was completely different than what they first imagined. They got married up in, off of Rampart Road somewhere, kind of up in I think it's Salida. I think it's Salida area. I always confuse Salida with Sedalia. I think that's right. You guys might have to correct me on that. But we just had a couple of family and friends, and that, in last week's episode of the podcast, Dave and I were talking, he was mentioning about how when we were talking about live streaming, I had said to him, I'm like, at some point you have to there's nobody else is going to make this roadmap for you. And if you wait for the map to come to you, you might be waiting for years before somebody thinks they're courageous enough to put that together. And I can identify that with that, of something I had to go through as a business owner during the pandemic, was trying to figure out, okay, well, what am I comfortable with? How do I do this? There is no roadmap to how to have a wedding during a pandemic, during coronavirus. So I have to figure that out, and I have to just get as much information as possible to make my decisions and understand that I might make the wrong decision. But my philosophy is I have to make a decision that I can live with. So I kind of said, okay, at that time I was having the conversations with them of okay, ultimately this is up to your comfort. I need to follow state policies. So there can't be more than 10 people in your picture at a time. This is what I was thinking of. There can't be more than 10 people in your picture at a time. You're going to have to, if you want to have other people come, they can watch from the road area. They have to be far enough away to be separate from what we're doing. And I would say this wedding was my first experience of starting to look at socializing in a different way, especially at a wedding, because as clear as we were with them up front and as clear as they were back with us and on the same page, that did not end up happening at their wedding. Yes, we were looking back now. I'm it was, in my opinion, COVID safe. There was less than 20 people there. We were spread out outside. People wore masks. So it was, in my opinion, looking back, it was fine. But in that moment, in May, when we were planning this, nobody knew. Nobody knew if that was going to end up being a crazy super spreader event, or if we were being safe enough, or not. So, in a way, I am grateful to all of those clients who, were courageous enough to figure it out with me, because I didn't know what we should do or what we should be doing at that point. In May, we shot another wedding, just the bride and groom, and she had one friend with her who wore a mask the whole time, and then they had one other couple friend that has some immune system stuff, so they literally watched from maybe 55 yards away. They got married under this little barn, and then we spent about an hour going to take pictures of just the two of them. And they and that was kind of their original plan, was a small elopement and then just celebrating with their families. But obviously not quite with the amount of restrictions and with the masks. That was also another thing I had to figure out as a photographer, is how do you take pictures of people in masks? Even just the Mr. and Mrs. mask photos. I've learned a lot since then. But it wasn't until July that we ended up having a quote unquote more traditional wedding at a wedding venue with, I think it ended up being 80 to 90 or 100 guests. And that wedding was it was uncomfortable, to be honest with you. Like, it was so uncomfortable to go through it at that time. At that time, I hadn't been in that kind of a social setting where part of it was going to be indoors. And I think there were mistakes that were made. There were, I remember that they had like an ice cream bar and they just sat out like a thing of spoons for everyone to grab, like from the same jar, and like grab their ice cream cup, and that, I don't know if that was just the venue not knowing better at the time, or if, just needing to look at things in a new way. But now with like ice cream bars at weddings, they literally will have like a staff member like scoop you up some ice cream, hand you a spoon, they've got their gloves on, and hand it to you, so that there's no risk of like as much germs with the guests. But I would say that as the summer went on, I did start to gain more confidence in going to be at weddings, the confident in our N95 masks, keeping us safe, and of course them safe from other people. And I would say by August or September, it was, starting to feel a little bit more like, okay, hey, this is how we can do it. And that's actually funny because I just got an email from a couple who was talking about like they're getting ready to plan their wedding. They had rescheduled it. And they were saying, what do we do about the masks? We don't want masks in all of our photos. And for me, I've had to step out of a place of judgment. So I understand that talking about this might be triggering for some of you guys listening, because you might have very black and white thoughts about like people should just embrace wearing masks and that should be it. And I'll share with you, I wear a mask wherever I go. Dave and I went and had our very first like moment at a brewery the other day. We just went in for a quick, I told him, I was like, I can do this for one beer. And I wore my mask the whole time. That's my choice of how I choose to move through this pandemic. But I have to admit that I don't have any judgment for somebody who dreamed of their wedding without masks and who is feeling frustration about wearing masks. I think that the best thing that I've seen when it comes to weddings is to have a blend, as many options as possible, so that your guests can navigate it as they feel comfortable. So if you get invited to a wedding and you're not doing weddings, then, send your regrets and don't come. If you want to be a part of it, but you can't go in person, maybe there's a live streaming option. I've been a part of weddings where bridesmaids do not want to take their masks off, not even for a bridesmaid photo. And so we do a photo with them with a mask on, and then they stepped out for the photos with the bridesmaids who did feel comfortable standing next to each other. We've done social distance bridal parties. We've done, reception pictures where like we just ask the guests to take their masks off. They're usually sitting with people that they've already broken that bubble with. So there's lots of variations of how to approach this. And I think the winning strategy, besides the one that doesn't spread COVID everywhere, is the one that respects people's decisions around what they feel safe doing for themselves. And I do understand how complicated that is, because there are people who don't care. It's very unfortunate, and the people who are denying the science, I do have a big problem with that. But sharing that, I hope you guys can understand where I'm coming from in that regard. And I'm grateful that, by, fall, certain things had fallen back into place. Like we were able to do some fall mini sessions for people. And, like we sent our dog off to, doggy daycare, and we were able to do our training with him. And, I was able to get a bit from within off the ground and running. I didn't mean to go off so much on a photo tangent leading up to now, but I have to say that A Bit From Within is one of the best things that could have ever come out of this pandemic. And I'm going to put my phone down because we probably don't need to read any more posts. For me, it was just a way to kind of jog my memory. But what I can say that I've been sitting with right now in reflection of this past year is I am so grateful for A Bit From Within. I don't know if I'm teaching yoga in the right way or not. Again, that'll be something in 5 years that yoga teachers will be able to look back and be like, this was the winning strategy to teach online or teach during the pandemic. All I know is that I had to do what felt best for me. And for me, the reason why I offer pre-recorded classes through the Patreon page is because I know that the people who need the gentle yoga that I offer, I feel like those people are not able to plug into a certain time schedule. It's different when you work at a yoga studio and you have a Sunday class, and that's a time frame that really works for a lot of people. But now, COVID is like being all of us in a snow globe and just having shaken our lives up. And I feel that in my life. And that is why I wanted to be able to do the Patreon, because the Patreon, it's super simple. People don't have to pay every time they want to take a class. People don't have to pay every time they want to connect with you. They don't have to sign up or register. All they have to do is sign up for the Patreon, $12 a month if you want to take the yoga, and you get access to it all. I've got the guided meditations. I've got all different kinds of yoga classes. I've got some short ones and some longer ones and some ones that are more moving and some ones that are more grounding. They're all gentle. They're all doable for the body. And that was the other thing that I don't know if it was the right move. I just know it made sense to me to have gentle yoga and a lot of classes that help people just feel and understand what they're going through and do their best to just move that needle a little bit from where they are in that moment, to hold space for themselves, to be more compassionate, to move their body, to get on their mat, to do something, even if you're not in the same shape that you were at the beginning, or if you've improved your shape, it just can't hold on to any of that. And I'm really struggling with that myself right now, because over this pandemic, I've gained quite a bit of weight, and I see it when I look at myself, and I think a can of worms I'm starting to realize is from a long, long, long time ago, back into becoming a woman, back into teenagehood, issues with my own body type that I'm going to have to face. Because it's coming up right now. It's coming up big. It's coming up strong. And I need to have the courage. And I know that it's coming up now because I am capable of dealing with it. But the reason I say that is because I think a lot of us have been in this stress response from COVID. And I think that there was an opportunity with COVID to figure out what was happening in the space. What did the space bring us? Did it bring us opportunity? Did it bring us loneliness? Did it bring us, face to face with the shadow? Did it make us feel powerless? Did it make us feel, just all of the things? There's so many things that this can of worms brought up for us. Maybe conflict within our family, conflict within our relationships, maybe closer together with friends that we haven't bonded with for a while, maybe closer together with our partner. I mean, for Dave and I, holy cow, a year ago he was working for a corporate job. We had no idea if we were going to get through the year with the business. Now we've gotten through, we've rebuilt our business, reshaped it, got him full time, and are both figuring out how to get closer to our dreams and closer to each other and start to really turn our eyes towards what our next steps will be. And I'm so excited for that. So there's been so much good and so much bad. And there's just no other way that I can say that. But, I do, when I kind of close my eyes and I think back on this past year, it's easy easiest for me to think, oh God, I'm so glad I started that podcast. I'm so glad I reconnected with people through the Patreon. I'm so glad I started a website. I'm so grateful for the couples that we've met and connected with. I'm so grateful for my team. I'm so grateful for my family. I'm so grateful for my dog. I'm so grateful for my sweet, sweet, amazing girlfriends who have been so supportive. Even just here and there, talking about business, talking about family, talking about relationships, talking about loss. I'm so grateful for that. But damn it, it's also been really freaking hard. And there has been a lot of shadow work that has come up for me. And there has been, in spite of all that was created, I don't even know if I can put this into words other than there's also been this has been kind of the culmination of a fallout for me in a lot of ways. It's like I've been looking at my vision board for a while, just seeing it kind of shrink and some of the ideas get smaller, and lacking the adjectives that I usually feel so clear about. And I think there's been that I feel like there was maybe a trajectory there anyway of me kind of feeling powerless before COVID, which might sound kind of funny because I do recognize that there has been action that could be translated as powerful. But in my experience, I have felt powerless over the things that I have wanted. And because of that, because of the subconscious no's that have been running through me, like NOs, I think there was so much limitation, and then you just put all of this limitation on top of it. And I think that it led to some really big emptiness inside of me that I am just now starting to be able to name and understand and maybe begin to shift. Actually, I do feel like there's some tectonic plates inside of myself starting to shift around a little bit. And I do think you have to go through the void. I really do believe that. I think you have to go through periods of contraction before you find expansion. And I think what nobody talks about enough is that sometimes those things can be happening at the same time in different areas of your life. So while one area of your life is contracting, there are little, expansions happening here and there, and vice versa. Sometimes you go through something really big and the contractions you're going through are super minor. But all I can say is that I am grateful to be ending this anniversary of this year mark by hopping in a car with the love of my life and us taking this road trip together. And in a way, I feel like this is truly this kind of celebration and this new beginning of a brand new chapter with this human that I've been building a life with for the past 4.5 years. And I feel very strongly that this will be, what did Brene Brown call it? She called it glass door moment. I think that's what she called it, sliding door, something. Basically, the moment that if that didn't happen, your life would be completely different. I feel like us saying yes to this trip and yes to what we might find is going to be a glass door moment. So by the time that you're listening to this, I'll have almost been done with this glass door moment. We will be home again next Wednesday night. So I cannot wait to share with you the adventure, the highs and lows. I'm sure there are going to be plenty of funny conversations and unusual circumstances. And my intention going in is to reclaim the parts of myself that have gone dormant, or at least invite them to begin to shine again and open up and gain inspiration. And, well, there's probably more too, but those are the main ones. And yeah, so you guys, we're going to pick a card, from the Wild Oracle deck. And actually, as I was, preparing for this episode, I was looking through this deck and I picked 5 cards that, all jumped out to me that all had to do specifically with COVID. So what I'm going to do is I just have these 5 cards here and I'm just going to shuffle through these, and at some point here while I'm shuffling, one's going to just pop up, and that's going to be our card for this episode. Challenges. Unbearable situations throw you directly into God's arms if you are open. Please take over, divine, and guide the right actions. Please take this burden and show me your will. I love that so much. That's one of the reasons I pulled that card, and specifically so that I'll share with you the names of the other cards. So I pulled trust, divine timing, hardship, and spaciousness, along with this one, the challenges. And I like that hardship is different than challenges, but I love this card that we've pulled to kind of remind us that there is truth when we say that there have been unbearable situations, whether you have been affected because of the politics of it, either in your community, in your family, in your heart, whether you've been affected by the health of it, if you are not the same healthiness that you have been, if you went through something, your family went through it, if it's just been the loneliness of not being in that regular routine, of not having the things that you so value in your life, you know, the sports or the arts, or the concerts, or going out to dinner, you know, all of that. There's an element of loss there. And of course, the job situation, the financial stability. I mean, this is real shit. And I understand that. And I guess all we can do is take it as a challenge and continue to trust in the divine plan as best we can, not 24 hours a day if that's not real, but maybe it's just 5 minutes a day. I'm releasing this week a 3.5-minute meditation. The shortest ones I usually do are around 8 to 10 minutes for meditation, but sometimes you just can, all that bandwidth you have is for 3 minutes of breath. And I think it's especially good for moments like this. The other thing that I just want to quickly say is, if you have struggled with anxiety or panic attacks, or if this time period has brought that out for you, check out my blog post that I just released called What Actually Helped Me with Panic Attacks. And I think what I'm going to do is probably sometime in March or April actually have an episode specifically for this. I'm going to try to get a guest on who's been experienced in this area. But it would be, I just want you to know, if you've experienced any of that, it is totally understandable. And there are real things that you can do to help you with that. So even if it's a 3-minute meditation, there's lots of things you can do to create a parasympathetic nervous system response in your body, like a weighted blanket, or magnesium is really, really important to help with coping with stress and anxiety. So if you have been having a lot of anxiety attacks, sometimes just looking at your magnesium levels, getting on a supplement like Natural Calm. It's the link is in the bio for this from my blog, but it's just a very well-known, you can buy it at Sprouts or Natural Grocers. My physician's assistant that I see, she actually told me about this, but it's just a little small thing that, you scoop into your water and drink, and it really, really helps. And what really also helps the parasympathetic nervous system is just breathing slowing down, giving yourself the space to actually start to physically relax your body. So remember all of those tools and check them out to continue to help you with your self-care. I so appreciate you for listening and tuning in today. I hope that you maybe take a moment to share some of your revelations, things that you thought then, a year ago, that you think differently now, the ways that you've opened yourself up or had to draw a line. There's room for it all. Take care, and we'll talk to you next week.